everyone, and welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and joining me is
Ray Christner.
Yeah, and today, we're kind of taking on a bit of a social phenomenon, talking about the iPad kid, and, it's trending on TikTok. And Ray, I know you had a couple interviews about this, so, fairly well versed in it. So yeah, we're wanting to break it down and talk about what it is and kind of what we can do with the information that we get from it.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is a topic that's kind of come up pretty, this is a topic that's come up kind of pretty quickly, and I've just keep hearing more and more about it. I think that's what TikTok does to content. But it's interesting. I've been thinking about this whole concept for a while, and for me, it was just not that long ago, just a few weeks ago, my family and I took a trip to New York, and as we're on the train, had this family that was sitting in front of us, and they had two young kids, I'd say probably like the 3 to 5 range. And they came in, they sat down, and parents got their devices out, got them all hooked up. And before the even train pulled out, they're watching whatever videos. And these two kids, from a behavioral standpoint, were angels for the 2.5 hour trip. And for me, though, I was, as we're taking this trip, I'm thinking, gosh, like these kids aren't even aware of what's going on around them. And I remember when my kids, who are now adults, but remembered like when we take a train trip, like the excitement they had of kind of looking out the window and being aware of their surroundings and the conductor coming and taking their tickets. And, as the ride went on for me, I thought, wow, like they just missed 2.5 hours of just excitement and experiences because they were kind of on devices. And then fast forward about 2 weeks after that, and I start getting asked to be doing interviews about iPad kids. And so, yeah, I think this is an interesting topic.
It's no doubt that we as, culture and society have become inundated and really saturated with technology, and and I don't even think that this is necessarily true, but, before COVID, maybe we had a bit more distance away, but really after COVID, it set a standard that said that, connectivity and the ability to work remotely, the ability to connect through video, and also the amount and ways that content is being produced. It was the first time a major box office movie skipped the theaters, COVID, right. But, went straight to home, straight to iPads, right. And so we are then not needing to even leave our home to reach, what the next media is. It's just there for us instantly at our fingertips. And man, is it convenient, but I think that there's a lot of pros and cons that come along with this.
Sure.
And in particular, I think when we're talking about, iPad kids, like it's this generation that's really all they've ever known. They've grown up with it. They are experts at it. I think I even, I can't recall if this was something that you had talked about in your interview or if it was something that I was reading online, but someone was talking about how, their roommate who has a 2-year-old was looking out a window and saw a butterfly, and they were making a pinching movement with their fingers. And the idea of trying to zoom in on what they effectively saw as a big screen. And this individual who hasn't mastered speech has mastered the use of technology.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. And, so, I think that's a great example, right? Like it's, we're kids even at 2 are that savvy with it, so this term iPad kid, I think, we made reference to TikTok. So I think maybe we should just, for those who maybe are not watching TikTok videos, they were shared with me. So I've watched probably more than I should have at this point, but it's interesting. So, kind of started with I think it's a young guy that started the whole trend, but, he basically is part of the Gen Z group. So, I look to be maybe, late teens, early 20s, and basically just says, hey, Gen Zers, we need to do a better job at raising our kids and not use the screen as a babysitter. Now, I'm reducing it to a real small kind of sample of what he said. But I think what's interesting is the reactions that come from that. And, if as I watched it on TikTok and have read, kind of immersed myself in this a little bit more, it really made a lot of parents angry. And, they were on one hand going, you don't have kids. You don't know what it's like. You can't be judging us as parents. And then you have other kind of Gen Zers who are saying, no, like we're the group that grew up with technology. Like we've never been without it. And we know the consequences and what's happening from it. So we don't want to make the same kind of mistakes, I guess. But man, it's really created this kind of polar opposite reaction. What was your reaction when you saw it?
There was a part because, certainly my stepdaughters, just thinking about their technology use and like the way that it is just so functional. And, now it's not so much a babysitter, it's a communication. It's, our ability to kind of keep track of things, to stay in touch. And it is phenomenal and it is easy. But there is also that consequence of it of like, they are on it pretty regularly. And, honestly, I think I probably am on my device more than I should as well. And so there's this ease of access that comes along with it. And honestly, when I was watching it, it sparked then a different thought of like, how this really occurred. And there's a different podcast that I was listening to, and the individuals were talking about, comic strips in the early 1920s. And then that led to kind of like more so like the comics that they were reading when they were growing up in the Sunday newspaper. And they made a comment about how you would start off with the worst comics and you'd save Garfield for last because Garfield was always going to be a great one. And you would check in on these different comics because you were starved for content. You were just waiting for the next thing to come along. And so we would take whatever that they had and then you had to wait. And then Saturday, cartoons came along. And then, now we have, more so like, development of like Cartoon Network and, cable TV and like now like all of this expanding. And, I'm a millennial, so I grew up with a lot of access to content, but there's a lot of content. I got to start being picky and choosy. So there was some that I liked, some that I didn't. So I couldn't relate as much to that. I'm going to take everything, but rather I can't wait for the things that I actually want to be here. And I can supplement it with other things. But now this idea that seasons of content drop all at one time and we can binge watch, and the catalog is so immense that it almost feels like, we've oversaturated the market when previously, there was a scarcity. And so now we have so much at our fingertips. Couldn't go through it all, even if you tried.
Well, and I even think like it's interesting, I'm you're the millennial, I'm the Gen X, and it's interesting for me because, I remember having Saturday cartoons and that was it. Like that's when you watched cartoons. So you had to wait. And, but now I find myself, even as I've adapted to technology, my wife and I got into this, watching Better Call Saul, the TV show, which, Breaking Bad was kind of a show I got really into. But I didn't know about that show until after I think 2 seasons were already dropped. So I watched both seasons in, I don't know, a week. It just seemed like we were just watching multiple episodes every chance we could get. And then I found myself waiting for the next episode, the next season. And it was painful. I was impatient. I was like, oh my gosh, like can't wait. So it's really interesting. I mean, I think it's, I think we all kind of adapt to it, but it was interesting when I watched it. I actually I hear everybody getting angry about it. I didn't take that at all. I actually, when I saw these TikTok videos, I was kind of hopeful. Like, I mean, when I listened to it, I thought, you know what, here's a group of individuals who recognize the problem and they've lived it and they see what they struggle with. And rather than kind of saying, oh, just as the way it is, they're starting to discuss how they might do it differently with their kids. And Yeah, maybe they're going to get it right. Like, I mean, I think technology changes so much. It's hard being a parent in the world of technology. Like, it's just, I mean, it's constantly changing, and we're trying to keep up with it. And, kids, I think, move faster than we do with it. Now we have this group of young adults who are saying, yeah, we got it. We understand it, and we can figure out a better balance. And for me, I'm like, I heard it and went, good for you. Like, I think this is great that they're doing it. And I don't think that is to criticize parents who have fallen into the technology trap with their kids. It's easy to do. That's not a criticism, but maybe we can start creating some healthier boundaries with it.
And I guess, talking about that, like, I feel like this idea of, technology use, there's really two different dynamics going on with it. It's, the amount of time that we're actually utilizing in front of a screen, but also what we're consuming when we're in front of that screen. So that the actual screen time and the content itself. Yeah. And I think both are an important conversation because, you were sharing earlier, and actually maybe we can talk about it in this way, like some of the general guidelines that the American Health Association,
American Academy of Pediatrics, actually, they've kind of have been really promoting this.
And I don't know that we can stay within their limits when we're getting to school age because of the technology use. And so at that point, is all the technology consumption that we should be having in a day already being met? And then what does that look like? And so we have to kind of find that balance in saying, okay, what is productive screen time? What is unproductive screen time? What does the content that we're consuming look like? And really, what's the impact that it's having for us? Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's absolutely it. It's really this whole idea of what's our plan around media use? How do we really kind of figure out what is the balance or the harmony or whatever word we want to use with it, where we have other activities and we have other experiences, but we recognize technology is not going away. Like, I hear people all the time go, oh, we're going to eliminate it. Well, we're not. Like, it's just, that's not going to happen, but we can find ways to live well with it and be better consumers of it. I think there's part of this with every generation. I mean, for me, I remember my parents going, oh, you can't watch that much TV. Like, if you watch, like that was the end of the world. And it wasn't, and we learned how to balance it, and we did well. And, before that it was, radio, and there's always something, I think, that happens. I think the difference with this is just it happens so fast. Like, before we actually understand the technology advances and it gets better on us. So, it's different. But yeah, so I mean, let's talk about content first. I think that's a good one to kind of maybe start with, and then we'll go into some maybe the guidelines. So I mean, what are your thoughts about the concerns around content? What have you kind of thought through?
So honestly, my thought goes to it, and this isn't so much in front of a screen like an iPad per se, but I remember when the movie Deadpool came out, and it was, Marvel movies doing very well. They're kids movies or superhero movies. And Deadpool comes out. And I remember having conversations with parents that said, I can't believe that they would put a movie like that out. I thought it was something that my child would, it's a superhero movie, and that is not appropriate. And like, for those individuals that are familiar with Deadpool as a comic book character, it was a pretty good adaptation. It wasn't all that surprising. Right. And yet we just kind of make these broad assumptions based off of the context of, a superhero movie. Okay, cool. Yeah, whatever. And then we're going in there and there's a lot of profanity. There's a lot of violence, a lot of gore, all these different things.
Sexual content's heavy in it. Yeah.
And in that way, I think we have to be savvy consumers. Like, we need to know, okay, what are the implications? And I do think that as technology is advancing, we're I'm hoping doing a better job of categorizing it in a way that's easily accessible, and we're able to then look at the content guidelines that are there. And so, same as the TV ratings, now we have different specifications for platforms like YouTube versus YouTube Kids. And it's not perfect though. So, we have to be monitoring, we have to have a pulse on what our kids are watching, because, sometimes things sneak in and, all of a sudden, where did you hear that? Where is that coming from? And actually, I've had some conversations with some parents where it's like, hey, some people are making some really inappropriate, some racially charged comments, and they're getting it from TV shows, or they're getting it from, content on YouTube. Like, I didn't even know he was watching that stuff. Like, again, this is more TV based, but South Park. Sure. And South Park pushes the envelope. And I have a client who struggles with some social cues and watching South Park. And it's like, oh, hey, it's a cartoon. And, so I'm saying the things that they're saying, and they're all laughing in the TV show when they're saying it. And I'm saying it. And now I'm getting in trouble.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's, it's interesting. I mean, even you mentioned about the Deadpool thing. I remember being in the movie theater when it came out and sitting there with all of these kids around and going, these parents did not pay attention that this was an R-rated movie and pretty significant. And the amount of people in the theater that left within 10 minutes, it was, that could have been prevented. Like, I mean, I think it's, so I think this idea of paying attention to content that our kids are on, absolutely. Like, watching, like if your kids are watching South Park, watch South Park, check it out, watch it with them first, see what the content is. But I think it's harder with some of the internet stuff though. I mean, I'm shocked how many times I come across something that's unexpected when I do a search, and I think I'm pretty savvy. Like, I think I'm pretty much like so gosh, I think there's so many things that can fall into the hands of kids. I mean, I think also with content, we have to think of things like, it's not only just the inappropriate stuff, just dangerous stuff. I mean, it's, I remember the Jackass movies coming out on MTV, and that was one level. But gosh, I've had kids tell me about videos they see on YouTube or TikTok or wherever of these risky behaviors, and then them trying to copy them. And, so the concern of injury and those things. And then you mentioned racial content and just things that are just, that I think some kids just don't understand. They don't understand what what that happens. So, I mean, trying to monitor content, I guess, parent guidance wise, it's hard. I think trying to get good parent controls and using them are probably our best bet. And the second is, and maybe the most important is, just watch it with your kids. Or if you hear what they're watching, take some time out of your day and actually take a look at the content to see what it is.
Yeah. And to that, and I would say I'm more Apple focused. So, I have an iPhone, my family has an iPhone, but screen time is a great resource for a variety. And, we'll talk about actually the usage of like setting limits on what's, how much time you can spend on a device, but it also does have privacy and content restrictions in there. So, I encourage, be curious, go into the settings and really explore that. We can set limitations on apps. We can set, also there's, we can screen for inappropriate text messages or messages that are coming up, and it's not perfect. It's not going to stop everything. But if we can think of it as like a filter, so we're filtering out, even if we're getting 50%, that's 50% we don't have to go through and sift through and being able to figure out. So, and we can then feel a greater sense of comfort. So I think it's, and the other thing, go into Google privacy settings, setting your safe, setting it to safe search, maybe a bit more restrictive or strict on those sites. So that way, again, if we're Googling something, we're not getting inappropriate content coming up. YouTube setting content restrictions there. Even apps like I know Disney Plus, we can set age restrictions and age limits, and just doing the best we can to do our due diligence. And sometimes it's a pain in the butt, but again, if it helps to screen certain things that we're not then having to go through ourselves. It's just doing our future selves a favor. So I think it's a really valuable resource.
Yeah, I agree. And, and I think regarding the time end of this, like how much is too much time. So, we can get into a little bit of the guidance here, but it's interesting. Like research right now says, 8 to 12-year-olds generally about 6 hours a day. They're on a device, and teens about 9 hours a day. So, that's pretty substantial.
Yeah.
I mean, you're when you take the fact that hopefully we're sleeping 8 of those hours, we're in school, that's a good portion of our time. I think before we talk about the guidance of it, I think, why is it an issue? I mean, I think I've had some parents go, it's not that big of a deal. I do think we have to pay attention to what the consequences of that time is. I think, at least from my perspective, being in the field I'm in, we see anxiety go up with kids that are on too much, see lack of connection start happening, maybe pulling away from friends. Now, sometimes there's positives because I do have some kids that make friends via the internet, but that alone maybe is not enough. And things like sleep, they're not sleeping as much. And then things I think, we hear about with social media, the whole idea of fear of missing out and those kind of things. They're checking devices because they're trying to keep up with everybody else. And man, that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, it really is. And, one other piece, and you mentioned about the anxiety, also a lot of irritability. And I can't tell you the number of parents working with the ADHD population. So, I think impulse control and some of those emotional dysregulation piece of it certainly plays a role, but you become a jerk when you have too much screen time, and so, we tend to have less patience, less tolerance. So we're snapping, and then also getting off of screen times. The number of times I hear it turns into a punching match, especially for younger kids where it's, you're taking this away from me and I'm tantruming then because I don't get that immediate piece. So, I do think that there are some strong challenges, and even that in itself, if I take it away, it's going to cause a fight.
Yeah.
Do I really want the fight? So in some ways we're kind of training ourselves to hey, let me appease to it. So that way make it easier for myself. And it's a hard piece to break. It is.
And, and I think, there's a lot of times we hear parents, say I think my child's more irritable when they're on their device. And there is research that has proven that it's not just a parent's opinion and maybe they're against devices. There's been research that shows excessive screen use ages 6 to 18 is kind of what they've studied. More emotional reactivity, higher levels of aggression, more external behaviors. And it's not just because they don't want the device. Those devices just pump our dopamine system. They're moving so fast and there's so much. It's difficult to make that transition. So, I think when parents say that's important, and really, I think from a clinical standpoint, it's important for us to listen and say, that truly can happen. Much less knowledge under the age of 6. I mean, we're not really, but now we're seeing younger and younger kids with it. Something we have to definitely pay attention to.
And, you talked about some of the recommendations, I guess, and I maybe even kind of gave a nod to those earlier, but Ray, do you mind sharing, what are some of the recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics?
Yeah. So there's a few different places that have made recommendations. So we'll kind of give some general, kind of rules. So when we're talking about time on devices, under the age of 2, we really should avoid screen time. Maybe a little exception if maybe you have family that lives at a distance and you're video chatting with grandma across the country. Great. Put the kid on there, have that interaction, but really not using things like the apps and having them watch shows on an actual device like that. Maybe as they get closer to 2, start maybe initiating that a little bit, where some high quality programming where you can kind of watch with your child, So, I mean, I'm a Sesame Street kid. They still have that. You can stream that. So you can start doing that but watching it with your kids. 2 to 5 years of age, generally limiting screen use to about an hour a day. Again, high quality programs are what we really should be focusing on. And again, I can't say enough, co-viewing things with your kids. Help them understand what they see. Help them see that you can pull away from the device as they are and kind of model those good behaviors. And then it gets a little harder when we're talking 6 years and older. So, generally the rules that the American Academy of Pediatrics suggests is less than 2 hours a day. But there's a little qualifier because at school, they're getting more than 2 hours a day just at school. And I think kind of mentioned that. So what we have to kind of think about is, again, this is where that kind of harmony or balance kind of comes into play, is think of it from their educational time versus, I think, recreational time.
Yeah.
And then we're using that 2 hours as kind of the recreational piece of it. Maybe they are going to have their iPad out when they're doing some of their homework. I mean, that's part of education nowadays, and we're probably not going to see that change. But maybe on weeknights when there are school days, that maybe instead of 2 hours, maybe we limit it to only about an hour of recreational time during school days. And then balance that out and maybe do 2 to 3 hours on the weekend. So, I look at it, and although we don't see this from the American Academy of Pediatrics, my advice to parents is think of it as a maximum of 2 hours or 14 hours for the week. Yeah. And how do we balance that out within that time frame? That can give them more time when they're not going to be on it for 4 hours during the school day. So we got to kind of use that balance in general. And,
I'm going to call out again use the technology in the ways that allow us to limit it. So, and I do know, and I don't have the name off the top of my head, but Android does have its own counterpart to this, but screen time, it's such it gives us a nuanced control over, okay, how much time per this day, or even what are the different apps that are allowed for different time frames? When are they allowed after everything turns off? It's not off. They can still maybe make phone calls or text messages if needed. You can restrict the content or the contacts there. So there's a lot of value there. So, making sure that we are kind of setting ourselves up, because I think a lot of times if I'm talking with parents about this, like, managing their screen time feels like a full-time job. And I'm not saying it's not, but I think that we can use the tools effectively, and it then gives us a greater ability to do it well and keep it consistent. And I think a big thing is consistency with this. I know that, hey, if the device just, gives us a warning and then it stops functioning, that's going to be typically a smoother transition than if I'm walking up and, taking the device out of a hand. And so, I think there's immense value to these different things, and it allows us, gives us a greater ability to meet those expectations more consistently.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're right. There are tons of great apps that are available out there. And I tell parents all the time, there's not maybe a perfect one. Find the ones that are kind of best for you. The other thing I would kind of, say on this is, there's also, when we're thinking about time, it's not an exact science. And there are some kids that maybe use devices a little bit more, and it doesn't functionally impact them. We don't see it affect their grades. We don't see it affect their sleep. So we're not seeing the same impact. And other kids, that hour can be different for them, and it could be more difficult. So, as parents, we have to really, I think, kind of pay attention to our own kids and find what's really the balance for them. I think these are really good general guidelines, but then we have to put into place other things, So I tell parents all the time, what are the other kind of non-screen activities that kids are involved in, making sure they're doing something physical, that they're going outside to play, or they're, riding a bicycle, or whatever it could be, reading, drawing, going downstairs to play a musical instrument, something that doesn't involve screen. And what's that look like for them, and making sure that every day those are part of a kid's life as well, I think is important.
And a part of that, like if we think about like what are the skills that we're not able to build when we're on a screen? And so socially, we don't have to carry ourselves in a certain way. We don't have to really, especially if we're not being video chatting, we don't really have to manage how we're looking or our posture or, and any of those things. And so, how do we build the skills that the screen doesn't meet? And so, and also using the screen for what it does. Like, hey, again, going back to the screen time thing, I've seen some kids effectively time manage because I have this amount of time and this is what I want to do with it. And so if I spend this amount of time, so, let's talk up and let's kind of maybe even like point out like, hey, you're doing a great job managing your time well. But also how do we interact socially? How do we physically engage and being able to making sure that we're hitting those other domains of life, in a really significant way.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think the other piece to kind of a family media plan is, what are the non-screen interactions with the family within our households? What's the rules around having a device at the dinner table? I think one of the TikTok videos about iPad kids talk about going to a restaurant and seeing a whole family on their devices. What's that rule with us? Like, does everybody maybe put their devices on a charger and eat and interact with each other? Maybe we play board games together. Maybe as a family, people are going outside, but what are those times together where we're not using devices? I think that's important. I guess maybe tied with that, I would say, one of the things I tell parents all the time is also avoiding double screen time. So if as a family, we're watching TV, we all shouldn't have our devices in our hand also doing something else because we're really then not really watching TV. So that double device time, I think should be a no-no. We should be, if you're going to watch TV, watch TV. If you're going to be on a different media, be on that different media, because then we're just dividing our attention even more. So setting up those kind of interactions in the household, I think is also important.
Something that my wife got me for Christmas, and it's sparked a lot of conversations because right now it's hanging in my office, but she got me a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. And, over the winter break, one, I probably spent too much time over there working on the puzzle, but, everyone in my family played a part. We kind of go and sometimes it would be just one person over there. Sometimes it would be all of us. And so now it's framed and hanging in my office. And, thank you, honey. I absolutely love it. But, so that right now there's another puzzle sitting out on my, on a table where, hey, if we have the time, we're just going to stop and, attend to it. Yeah. Another great one that I think is for a younger generation, Legos. I know my stepdaughters that loved Legos for a time period. I know quite a few, my male clients really absolutely love Legos. And so being able to, again, a great way that you can just sit around, manipulate something. So just different things that are available that really can kind of provide a different experience as a whole.
Yeah. And I love the idea of, everybody contributing to something like a puzzle like that. Our family's done the same thing, and you might walk by and just put a piece or two in, but again, it's something outside that device time. And, a couple other just kind of maybe things to wrap up here. Other recommendations for parents, encouraging no device time about an hour before sleep. So, that means let's not take those devices to bed. And I know I hear all the time from people that I work with, it's their alarm clock, it's whatever. Then put it somewhere where you're not going to deal with, the messaging coming through, or you're not going to pick it up. What's the rules around that? And if we can't manage those rules, there's a lot of other alarm clocks out there that I think people can get. And then the last one I think maybe to kind of end with is, I think as parents, we need to learn how to be good consumers of devices too. I've fallen into the trap at times.
Me as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to do. And, I've had to catch myself a number of times and go, oh, wow, like I would be upset if my kids did this. And here I'm kind of down that rabbit hole as well. So I think paying attention to ourselves and trying to be the best example as we can as we try to navigate technology. And the more we do it with our kids, I think maybe the easier it is.
And maybe as a closing thought here, and something that you shared earlier, and your reaction to watching the videos initially is, it felt hopeful, and really and I think that's the intention behind this episode. It's not, it's not saying that, hey, technology is wrong, it's bad, avoid it entirely. But it's, hey, how do we use it effectively, impactfully, and creating and I think that's the message and intent behind those initial TikTok videos of how do we find a harmony within it, because technology is not going away. So we need to evolve to meet the need and do it in a way that's not going to be over consuming, but also not too restrictive.
And I agree. And I'll kind of end my comment with, I've mentioned a few times about the American Academy of Pediatrics, which I think puts out great information for families. And if you want some other resources, check out www.healthychildren.org. That is their website, and great tips on everything from device use to any other parenting thing you could think of.
With that, we hope you enjoy this episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks. But until then, be well, stay psyched. The information contained in this podcast and on the Psyched to Practice website is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional, psychological, psychiatric, educational, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no professional patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host, guests, and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health professional or practitioner, please contact services in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please locate a supervisor with experience to fit your professional needs.